I need you to stay with me for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that changes the way you see the people closest to you. I came home on an ordinary Tuesday to an empty house, expecting dinner with my wife, but by the time I went to bed that night, my entire life had been dismantled by a web of malicious lies, and everything I thought I knew about my family was gone. And what I found out next, most people can't even bring themselves to say out loud. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. My name is Ethan Vance. Until last year, I lived a quiet, hardworking life in Columbus, Ohio. I ran a boutique architectural restoration firm, a business built on trust, precision, and history. I was married to Clara, a woman whose grace and charm captivated everyone she met, especially my own family. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor, and my younger brother, Julian, practically worshipped her. To them, Clara was the perfect addition to the Vance bloodline. I thought I was blessed. But looking back, the signs of a meticulously planned execution were always there. I just chose to see them as quirks rather than warning signs. It began subtly. Clara started expressing deep anxiety about our financial security, urging me to transfer the deed of our historic colonial home and the primary business accounts into her name for tax optimization and asset protection. She brought it up during Sunday dinners, subtly dropping hints to my parents that I was becoming increasingly reckless with our investments. My mother, always protective, began giving me sidelong glances. "Clara is only looking out for your future, Ethan," she would say. I laughed it off. I trusted my wife blindly. I signed the papers, thinking I was securing our future. Then came the health scares. Clara began telling my brother Julian that I was experiencing severe mood swings and memory lapses. She claimed I was waking up in the middle of the night, pacing the hallways, and muttering incomprehensible things. None of this was true. In reality, I was working grueling 18-hour days to restore the historic Jefferson Theater, falling into a dead, exhausted sleep the moment my head hit the pillow. But Clara's narrative was gaining traction. She was laying the groundwork, painting me as a man losing his grip on reality. The ordinary Tuesday that ruined my life began like any other. I completed the final structural review for the Jefferson project and drove home eager to celebrate with Clara. When I walked through the front door, the silence was deafening. The house felt hollow. I called out her name, but only the echo of my own voice answered. I walked into the kitchen and found a neatly typed letter on the island counter, flanked by a stack of legal documents. The letter was from a high-profile family law firm in downtown Columbus. Clara was filing for an emergency divorce and an immediate restraining order. The allegations detailed in the document made my blood run cold. She claimed I had been physically abusive, financially abusive, and psychologically unstable. Attached were fabricated medical logs, altered text messages, and a psychological evaluation from a doctor I had never even heard of, let alone visited. The web was spun, and I was caught dead center. Panic roaring in my ears, I grabbed my phone and called Clara. It went straight to voicemail. I immediately drove to my parents' estate in Upper Arlington. I needed my bedrock. I needed my family. When I pulled up the driveway, I saw Clara's SUV parked outside. I sprinted to the front door and knocked furiously. When the door opened, I wasn't greeted with open arms or comforting words. My brother Julian stood there, his face contorted in disgust, flanked by my father, whose eyes were colder than ice. "Don't step another foot inside this house, Ethan," Julian spat, stepping forward to block the threshold. I stared at him, bewildered. "Julian, what are you talking about? Clara has lost her mind. She's fabricating stories." My father cut me off, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "We know everything, Ethan. Clara showed us the bruises. She showed us the financial statements where you've been draining your accounts into offshore funds. How could you do this to her? How could you disgrace our family name?" I pleaded with them. I begged my mother, who was watching from the top of the stairs with tears streaming down her face, to listen to reason. "Mom, look at me. You know who I am. I've never raised a hand to anyone in my life." But Clara had played her part perfectly. She emerged from the living room, wrapped in a blanket, looking fragile, terrified, and thoroughly broken. The moment she saw me, she let out a muffled sob and shrank back. That was the final nail in my coffin. My father threatened to call the police if I didn't leave immediately. "You are no son of mine," he said, before slamming the heavy oak door in my face. Standing on that porch in the bitter Ohio autumn air, the realization hit me like a physical blow. My own flesh and blood had abandoned me without a single shred of due process. They chose the beautifully crafted lie over the son they had raised for 35 years. Within 48 hours, Clara's trap closed completely. Using the emergency court order, she locked me out of our home. Because the business assets had been transferred under her legal umbrella during her optimization phase, she froze the corporate accounts, forcing my restoration firm into a sudden, catastrophic halt. Clients, hearing whispers of the domestic abuse allegations, began pulling their contracts. The Columbus business community is tight-knit. Once your reputation is stained with violence, the collapse is instantaneous. I was forced to rent a cramped, damp studio apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. I had nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a mountain of legal fees. My phone remained dead. No texts from Julian, no calls from my mother. When I tried to reach out to lifelong family friends, I discovered I had been thoroughly blacklisted. Clara had systematically called everyone, playing the tragic, surviving victim, ensuring that my isolation was absolute. In those dark weeks, sitting under the buzzing fluorescent light of my tiny apartment, I questioned my own sanity. How could a family turn so quickly? How could a brother I grew up sharing a bedroom with look at me with such visceral hatred? Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. I realized that Clara hadn't just planned this for months. She had studied my family's psychological vulnerabilities. She knew my father valued public prestige above all else, and she knew Julian harbored a quiet, lifelong resentment of my business success. She gave them exactly what they needed to justify cutting me down. Then the final blow fell. I received notice that Clara, with the full financial backing of my wealthy parents, was attempting to seize full ownership of my grandfather's historical ledger, the very foundation of my restoration business, claiming it as a marital asset of immense value. My family wasn't just staying out of it. They were actively funding the army trying to destroy me. I knew that if I fought Clara using standard legal defense, I would lose. She had the paperwork, she had the funding, and she had the emotional leverage. I needed to stop defending and start investigating. I hired Marcus Vance, no relation, a hard-nosed, cynical private investigator who specialized in corporate espionage and high-asset divorces. I gave him the last of my savings. Find out where she goes when she's not playing the victim, I told him. 3 weeks into the investigation, Marcus called me into his office. He didn't look sympathetic. He looked grimly fascinated. He threw a thick manila folder onto his desk. "Your wife is a genius, Ethan," Marcus said, lighting a cigarette. "But she made one massive mistake. She assumed you'd just curl up and disappear. She didn't expect anyone to look into her past before she arrived in Ohio." Marcus's research revealed that Clara wasn't her real name. 5 years ago, in Savannah, Georgia, a woman named Clara Montgomery had pulled the exact same scheme on a wealthy real estate developer. She had married him, alienated him from his adult children using forged medical and financial documents, drained his estate through a bitter divorce, and disappeared before the dust settled. The developer had ended up ruined, eventually taking his own life out of despair. But that wasn't the twist that broke the case wide open. The true terrifying revelation lay in who was helping her execute this in Columbus. Marcus tapped a photograph in the folder. It was a surveillance shot taken at a high-end bistro in Cincinnati, a 2-hour drive from our home. Sitting across from Clara, holding her hand, laughing over a bottle of wine, was my brother Julian. My jaw dropped. The room seemed to spin. Julian wasn't just a casualty of Clara's lies. He was the co-architect. The investigation uncovered an encrypted digital trail between them dating back to before Clara and I were even married. Julian had met her first in Georgia, recognized her talents, and brought her into my life with a singular parasitic goal: to completely strip me of my business, my inheritance, and my standing, allowing Julian to swoop in, take over the restoration firm, and splitting the liquidation of our family assets with Clara. Julian had played our parents like a fiddle. He was the one who validated Clara's fake stories of my abuse, pretending to be the protective brother-in-law while secretly feeding her the financial details of my company. They were planning to take everything, leave me broke or imprisoned, and then discover their love for each other once I was out of the picture. The grief of realizing my own brother had orchestrated my downfall was agonizing, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating fury. I didn't confront them. I didn't storm back to my parents' house. That's what an unstable man would do. Instead, I worked with Marcus and a federal forensic accountant to build an unassailable mountain of evidence. We tracked the dummy accounts Julian had set up, the forged signatures on the deed transfers, and the IP addresses from which the fabricated text messages had been sent. We discovered that Julian had actually used my company computer during a weekend visit to send those abusive messages to Clara's phone, framing me perfectly. Every piece of data was compiled into a comprehensive federal fraud and conspiracy dossier. I was no longer fighting a divorce. I was preparing a criminal execution. The trap was set to spring on a Friday morning in a private conference room at the Franklin County Courthouse. It was supposed to be a standard deposition for asset division. Clara arrived flanked by her high-priced attorney and my parents, who insisted on sitting in the gallery to support her against her abuser. Julian sat closely next to Clara, playing the role of her stalwart protector, occasionally giving me a smirk when our parents weren't looking. My attorney, a sharp, quiet woman named Sarah, sat down calmly, opening her laptop. Clara's lawyer began his opening statement, demanding full liquidation of my firm and the immediate forfeiture of the house. Sarah didn't argue. She simply turned her laptop toward Clara and Julian and pressed play on an audio file. The conference room fell dead silent as Julian's voice filled the space, clear and crisp, recorded via a hidden microphone Marcus had planted in their Cincinnati meeting spot. "Once the court awards you the Jefferson Project rights, we liquidate it," Julian's recorded voice said. "The old man and mom will believe whatever we tell them. They think Ethan is a monster now. They'll hand over the family trust management to me by Christmas. Just make sure you keep up the scared wife act a little longer." Clara's face went entirely bloodless, transitioning from porcelain white to a sickly green. Julian froze, his hand trembling as he reached for his glass of water, knocking it over. The water spilled across the mahogany table, mirroring the collapse of their perfect plan. My mother let out a sharp choke gasp from the back of the room. My father stood up, his face flushed dark crimson. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice booming. Sarah, my attorney, calmly handed a copy of the 300-page fraud dossier to Clara's lawyer, whose eyes widened in sheer panic as he skimmed the federal conspiracy charges. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance," Sarah said smoothly, addressing my parents, "your son Julian and his accomplice, the woman you know as Clara, have engaged in systematic interstate bank fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Federal authorities have already been briefed. This deposition is over. The criminal investigation has begun." Clara didn't even look at Julian. She grabbed her purse and attempted to sprint out of the room, only to be met at the doorway by two plainclothes Columbus police detectives. The fallout was swift and merciless. Clara was arrested on the spot. Her past caught up with her as the authorities in Georgia simultaneously revived their investigation into her previous husband's estate. Julian, cornered by unassailable forensic evidence of embezzlement and forgery, cracked within hours of his interrogation. To save his own skin, he turned on Clara, but it was too late. Both were indicted on multiple felony charges. The public scandal tore through the Columbus elite. My family's pristine reputation, the one my father had valued over his own son's life, was shattered, not by me, but by the golden child he had championed. The business assets were legally restored to me, along with full ownership of my home, clear of any marital claims. 3 months after the courthouse showdown, I was back in my restored colonial home. The silence was no longer deafening. It was peaceful. As I sat in my study, reviewing the finalized contracts for the fully completed Jefferson Theater, the front doorbell rang. I walked down the hallway, opened the door, and found my mother and father standing on the porch. They looked 10 years older. The arrogant posture my father always maintained was entirely gone. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes cast downward. My mother was trembling, clutching a handkerchief to her face. They stood there, the very people who had cast me out into the cold without a second thought, now looking like beggars at my doorstep. "Ethan," my father began, his voice cracking, a sound I had never heard before. We didn't know. We were blinded. Please, son, let us in. We want to make this right. We want to be a family again." I looked at them, and for the first time in my life I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hatred, just a profound, empty indifference. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to ask," I said quietly, my voice steady. "When I came to your house begging for 5 minutes of your time, you slammed the door in my face. You chose a stranger's lies over your own son's character. You funded the weapons used to try and destroy my life." My mother sobbed, reaching out to touch my arm, but I stepped back, out of her reach. "Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story, and share your thoughts in the comments." "Julian is facing 10 years, my father whispered, desperate. "We need you to help us with the legal defense, for the family name." I looked him dead in the eye. "I don't have a family name anymore. I have my own name, and you can tell Julian that he can sleep in the bed he made." I slowly, firmly closed the heavy oak door, locking it securely. I walked back to my study, picked up my pen, and went back to building my future, completely free of the ghosts of my past. Thank you so much for staying with me through this incredibly painful journey. Stories like mine prove that sometimes the ultimate betrayal doesn't come from your enemies, but from the people sitting right across from you at the dinner table. If this story resonated with you, or if you admire the justice that was served, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts below, and subscribe to my channel, Family Secrets and Revenge. Your support helps ensure that stories of truth and survival continue to be told. See you in the next video.